I'm thinking about my story from last month about Shlomo Mansour, who was the oldest hostage currently being held in Gaza. As a young child, survived the bloody Iraqi Farhud. He went on to live another 70 years in the kibbutz. Then at age 85, was grabbed in his pajamas and violently shoved to his car and driven into Gaza on October 7th. I get emotional when I think about this guy. I'm sorry. It's like, it really affected me. Like talking to his daughter and his grandson. Like this buff kid who's like a personal trainer now, talking about how his Saba, his fondest memory is building a SpongeBob SquarePants doll out of wood with him in the workshop. It was just, it got you, you know? My name is Joel Chaushu, and I'm the Quebec correspondent for the Canadian Jewish News. I think these stories are worth telling. We can do that with your help. Visit the cjn.ca/donate to support our work. You'll get a quarterly magazine and a tax receipt to boot. What's not to love?
We are not naive. We are taking security seriously. The challenges we face will not deter us.
That's what it sounded like Sunday at a meeting hall somewhere in Hamilton, where Gustavo Rymberg, the Jewish Federation CEO, was introducing a community event called No More Anti-Semitism, where Melissa Lantsman was the scheduled keynote speaker. She's co-deputy leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. A coalition of local pro-Palestinian groups had mobilized about 40 protesters to try and disrupt the event, but they stood outside Hamilton's Jewish Community Centre on Main Street, carrying signs about genocide, although the event was taking place somewhere else on the outskirts of Hamilton, and we're not saying where that was. But the switcheroo was all part of the new security protocols recently put in place by the Hamilton Jewish Federation. The Federation says they're the first small Jewish community in Canada to directly be managed by the New York-based Jewish Federations of North America's Secure Community Network program. They get funding and training and alert system, and here's the key, they get access to the Jewish Federation's 24/7 Command Center based in Chicago, where former FBI agents and ex-military analysts collect real-time intelligence about threats to the Jewish community, and they share it and liaise directly with the Homeland Security people and the FBI and other respected agencies south of the border. As part of the deal, Hamilton got to hire a security chief, Glenn Mannella, a veteran police commander formerly with the Halton Regional Force. He started 2 months ago in Hamilton, taking specialized training down in Chicago. And now that the Melissa Lantsman event is successfully behind him, he held his first workshop called Guardian Training on Monday night for Hamilton's synagogues and schools and Jewish buildings.
It's heartbreaking that as an entire segment of the community has to live that way for no reason. A Jewish person shouldn't have to live that way.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. The Americans set up their secure community network after 9/11 to act as an iron dome for Jewish federations. Take-up was slow at first, but since October 7th, about 130 federations, big to small, are on board. In Canada, Hamilton's is the first one which the Americans directly manage. The idea is that with better training and intel and an alert system than what's available now in Canada, plus more money for security equipment and millions in matching funding from multiple Canadian donors, this will better protect the Jewish community across North America from tragedies like the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh in 2018. Officials say their program is a success because of the training that saved the lives of congregants in Colleyville, Texas in 2022, when the rabbi threw a chair at the attacker, saving everyone. Despite its small size of just 5,000 Jewish people, Hamilton has a loud and active pro-Palestinian community whose members have gained national and international headlines since October 7th, including provincial NDP MPP Sarah Jama, federal NDP MP Matthew Green, Rabbi David Mivasser, and other members. And with local police budgets stretched thin so they can't patrol the Jewish areas 24/7, and security in Canada really a patchwork which varies from city to city, The Jewish Federation in Hamilton says it made sense to look to the U.S. for help. To learn more, I'm joined by Hamilton's new security director, Glenn Mannella, and by Gustavo Rymberg. He's CEO of Hamilton's Jewish Federation.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Hi, Elaine. Very nice to be here.
This weekend, Hamilton Jewish Federation was hosting an important event. Glenn, this might be the first big test.
Definitely. I started the role at the beginning of October. Shortly after that, we did have the Liberal Party with some high-profile MPs attending. It was a sellout. The Federation was doing some very good proactive work to make sure their events were safe. This event, obviously, as everybody can tell, has attracted a lot more attention because of Melissa Lansing being the speaker. But we just took what was already a good screening program, security program, and we've just enhanced it. The Hamilton Police have been great to work with. As a retired police officer, I've been able to utilize relationships I already had with Hamilton Police, make some new connections, and they've been very responsive. They recognize the environment we're in right now.
What was the motivation for Hamilton not relying on its own Canadian-based systems like, for example, Toronto has, Montreal has, but preferring or choosing to use the system that was set up by the Jewish Federations of North America?
Many different issues. Okay, number one, you have to understand the realities of small communities. It's not the same like Toronto and Montreal, okay? The action that is taking place in Montreal and Toronto is like totally different from what is happening in Hamilton or any other small community. But at the same time, they have access to much more resources and in infrastructure that we don't have, okay? So their campaign is much bigger. There's more money allocated for security. We have this opportunity where the Jewish Federations of North America is helping, especially small communities, to raise the money to put this program together. And also they offer a program, that it's in our case, it's great because, to be honest, I'm as a CEO, my job is not to be a security expert, okay? But everything changed in the last year. So for us, it was a win-win situation. Unfortunately, in Canada, we didn't have the opportunity to access to something like this.
What gaps, and this I'm going to open to Glenn, what gaps do you see or are you trying to fill, and what you're training through this SCN is now bringing to Hamilton?
Yeah, one of the biggest parts of my job is conducting security assessments. So one of our experts from SCN came up, and we were able to do assessments on all the synagogues in the area. And I know security companies can do SEPT heads. Police services will do it as a service to the community. But the way SCN does their security assessments is like nothing I've ever seen. We spent several hours at each of the synagogues photographing the property, assessing the entry points, assessing every window and door, looking at how their camera system works, looking at how their alarm system works. Basically doing a full assessment on the entire property, how they run their operations, and then going back and putting together a very in-depth report. And from that report, we'll highlight any gaps that we see in security and make recommendations on how to improve it. And then what they can do is the individual facilities, they take that report and they use that when they apply for a grant to get the funding to address those gaps.
So funding from who, though?
For the synagogues, that's to make application on a new CCSP grant. What used to be SIP.
Ottawa, right? Okay, yeah.
That's the purpose of that.
What are the specific challenges that Hamilton has that you've seen that you were surprised to learn or that we might not understand?
I don't know if they're unique for us, but synagogues, for example, training is a big issue. And something that Glenn is doing through SCN is we have to make sure that everyone, and for me, that's a big priority in this new program, is like everyone, doesn't matter where you are, know what to do in a case of an emergency, okay? We have many cases, proof evidence that a lot of the incidents that happen in synagogues in the States, or also maybe, they were not as bad as they could be because people were properly trained.
But I'm surprised that hasn't been done already over, I mean, CJN, I'm not going to criticize or anything, but law enforcement training has been, there's the three words, right? And we've done this since 2021.
But not with the same intensity, okay? And I think that the training is more consistent, more professional. It's not only one training. It's important for me that it doesn't matter which synagogue I go, or doesn't matter if I attending an event in the JCC or an event in the theater. But I think that it's important for everyone to have the same standards and the same security protocol. Every member of the community should be properly trained. We didn't have until now the same level of protocol and the same level of training in all the synagogues, okay? So each one is doing the best that they can, but I think that now what we're trying to do is standardize up.
After over 30 years in policing, looking at the training packages that SCN rolls out, it's excellent. I wish I would have had this stuff to give the community when I was a police officer.
You went down to headquarters, Chicago? Were you blown away by what you saw?
Blown away by the quality of the people that work there. Of the security advisors, the people that do my job, I would say probably the high majority are former FBI agents. So they're bringing incredible experience, counterterrorism investigations, a lot of people with tactical backgrounds. So just a lot of specialization. So the people, I'm humbled to be working with the people I'm working with. Put it that way. In my opinion, it's not just what I can bring to the table. It's what's behind me. If you looked at SCN's website, you'll see that they have their security operations center. Seeing that and how it works is just incredible.
So it's like a movie. Everyone would see all the monitors, and we would not have that in a small town Hamilton or Halton police headquarters.
Exactly. And what I'm able to do is I'm able to plug into that database all of our locations, all of our key people, so that if there is a threat in the community, we can alert everybody immediately. If there's something that the JSOC picks up as a threat in the area, they can alert me.
What is JSOC?
Security Operations Command Center, that big room you saw with all the monitors.
I haven't seen it. I'm just imagining it.
It's like nothing I've ever seen. They're constantly monitoring for threats towards the community.
That's something that you said as a police officer in your area until you retired from the force. You didn't have that, right?
Every police service does have a cyber team. Every police service has the capability of doing, I would think, what our JSOC does. It's just having the ability to reach out and get that information immediately is what SCN brings to the table that the Hamilton Federation wouldn't have if they just hired a standalone security member.
What I'm hearing is that Hamilton cannot possibly have the same, size and reach and depth by tapping into local Canadian law enforcement systems. And it's much more effective in preventing or at least warning of problems than you could ever find here. Yes? To say it in a more succinct way, better antenna. Antenna.
I believe so. Yes. That's a fair way to put it. Much better antennae.
And also to your point about the Canadian resources, pretty sure that the resources exist. But the thing with the SCN and JFNA, they were working on this for a long time. They are organized and they formalized this program. Okay, so that doesn't exist in Canada yet. Maybe it will happen. Maybe this will be an inspiration from Canadian sources to do something like this. But for now, I think it's working great for us. It's a very good resource for security, for information, for safety, and for us to feel properly protected.
Can we talk a bit about the biggest threats that you feel, and this is for both of you, that exist to Hamilton?
The concerns, the complaints I'm getting from the community, the most frequent would be the issues of graffiti, posters, flyers that are, I guess they're being promoted as pro-Palestinian when there's a level of anti-Semitism to them. They may not meet the threshold of a criminal offense. They're not crossing the line of advocating genocide or promoting hate, but they're causing significant concern and fear for the safety of the community. What I want the community to recognize is there's going to be things that frighten you, concern you, that the police can't do anything about. It hasn't crossed the threshold for them. But that's what I need to be notified of, and I'm going to track. We're going to catalog it. We're going to track it. And let's say we get a pattern of graffiti or flyering that doesn't cross the threshold, but then at some point it does. Then we'll have that evidence to give to the police and say, hey, this isn't a one-time issue. This has been culminating for a while. People having comments directed towards them, anti-Semitic comments by other people in the community. That's way more frequent than I ever imagined.
Online, you mean, or in person?
In person, people walking down the street, if they're wearing symbols that indicate they're Jewish, people are actually commenting at them, making anti-Semitic comments. We've had people being told that they're baby killers because they're wearing a Jewish symbol. I was shocked to learn that that's going on in our community. The police have been fantastic to deal with. And when it comes to an event that...
Oh, they do have a hate crimes unit now in Hamilton.
That hate crimes unit that is well-staffed, and we have an excellent relationship with them. But again, they're strapped for resources like everybody else.
There is something else that I think is important to mention, Eileen. It's like the big picture in Hamilton, the politics in Hamilton, with the NDP strong anti-Semitic and anti-Israel approach. The fact that Sarah Chapman will be considered again as a MPP for the NDP, it's a problem. The influence of independent Jewish voices and David Mibasair in Hamilton, they are a problem. The situation in the Board of Education, another challenge. So,
You almost hosted the Hizb al-Tahrir Caliphate conference in Hamilton until the mayor said no.
I think, it was canceled, so we that's done. But there are many things that they are like fueling, the online postings and there's all these external agents, whatever that they fuel the hate. Okay, so from my own perspective, I really don't like to take anything for granted. I came from a very different background from the majority of the Canadians. I experienced myself, living in Argentina, the bombs, the community center and the embassy came from nowhere. And I always say, can happen anywhere, anytime. And we have to be prepared somehow, or we have to be aware that something like this can happen anywhere. And that's my biggest fear, personally. Maybe it's my personal old trauma, whatever, going through that. But it's something that we cannot forget.
Glenn, can I bring you back in for a minute? You mentioned earlier something that really struck me, that you were shocked when you saw, or people are reporting to you, that on the streets or at campus, people are getting slurs, baby killers, verbal assaults. How does it compare, and how has that view of what Jews are living like changed since you started this job?
I'm glad you asked that. Back when I was a young police officer, I was in a uniform out in the community. You would want to go and sit in a coffee shop and have a coffee, or go in uniform and have your lunch. And you learn to live in what we used to call the yellow zone. You can't be totally relaxed because you're in uniform, and there are people in the community, there are people in this world that will cause harm to a police officer if given the opportunity. You would be sitting, having your coffee, having your lunch, but you would be aware of everything around you and prepared to respond, react. I think the average Jewish person who's aware of what's going on in their world has to live like that all the time. And that's not acceptable for a person to have to worry that while I'm in synagogue, I got to be aware the doors are in case I have to run out. While I'm in my community center, I have to be aware of who's following me in the door in case this person's coming in to cause harm. I grew up as a Catholic, so I didn't grow up with any Jewish friends, so I knew very little of the faith. And I'm sure the level of anti-Semitism that we're experiencing now, I'm pretty sure that probably wasn't like that when I was a young person. So this is all new to me. It's eye-opening.
What else has surprised you since you started this job, that what you've learned from the United States that you're applying here in Canada?
Hamilton in particular, with politicians that have aligned themselves with the pro-Palestinian movement, they're emboldening the community, in my opinion. So I think that Hamilton's unique in that we've almost got a culture that accepts this sort of behavior. And talking to my counterparts in the U.S., where they're from communities that don't have that kind of left-leaning politics. They're not seeing that type of thing. Where they're getting their concerns are through the white supremacist groups, whereas we're seeing it from the so-called pro-Palestinian groups that are practicing this anti-Semitism.
My name is Rivka Campbell, and I am the host of the CJN Podcast, Rivkush. My podcast, it's a focus on Jews of color, talking about anything. It's really important for mainstream Jews to see that I am just as Jewish as you. The topics that interest you also interest me. I want to talk about Israel. You want to talk about Israel. I want to talk about food. Maybe it's not the food you want to talk about, but I want to talk about food. It's important that the person talking about Judaism, Israel, whatever, has a faith like mine. It really, hopefully, changes the perception of Jews of color. To support my podcast and the rest of the CJN, please make a tax-deductible donation at thecjn.ca/donate.
We live in a Canadian environment. It's not a gun culture like the United States is. And the laws are different than in America when it comes to policing this kind of terrorism or threats. How do you navigate that? Because you're working with Canadian laws, but the Americans are teaching you what to do.
No, that's a fair question. I did have to modify, Canadianize with the experts at SCN a lot of the material, because in the U.S. they have obviously armed security guards. That's not an option up here. And paying pay duty officers, we're able to hire pay duty officers when we need them, but that's not sustainable financially. So there is some discussion, and even within the U.S., they debate what is the best model. Is it recognize that your congregation's armed? Because a lot of the U.S. states have they're allowed to carry. So they discuss, are we better off having our congregation armed, or do we say we want to hire armed security guards, or do we want to hire off-duty police officers? Or they also have the option of hiring retired police officers in the U.S. because they're allowed to keep their firearms license. So we're in a different position where, yes, we have reportedly less guns in the community. However, as we see, you look at the news, the prevalence of firearms in our community is growing. Having worked in Halton for over 30 years, gun crime was pretty rare when I first started. The last 5 years, it's shot up. Not the level of Toronto, Hamilton, or Peel, but as indicated that society has changed greatly. So yeah, the concern about firearms, the lack of firearms to protect our facilities is something that I think needs to be addressed at some point.
You were going to say disadvantage, weren't you?
Yeah, I would say it is a disadvantage, because I think we're of the belief that because we don't have the lenient firearms laws that the U.S. have, that there's not guns out there. But no, we know guns are out there in the hands of bad guys. What we don't have in Canada is guns in the hands of the good guys. And I'm not saying I'm a pro-gun person. I think we had reasonable firearms laws a few years ago. If we'll ever see Canada pivot towards allowing armed security guards is something I don't know. We allow armed guards to safeguard our money going in and out of banks and in and out of ATM machines, but we don't allow armed guards to protect our synagogues and our community centers. Where's our priorities?
So, Gustavo, does that mean Hamilton's now going to be the safest community for Jews in Canada now that you have this American big network to tap into?
I don't know if we're going to be the safest, but we're going to be the very well prepared one to deal with whatever we have to do. And listen, I'm very aware that decisions that we're going to make regarding security are not going to make everyone happy. But
why won't they make people happy? I'm not understanding.
Well, some people maybe are not going to be happy, like, okay, every time that you go to an event, you have to show ID twice. Okay, it's inconvenient, whatever, but that's security. There's going to be people that maybe they're not going to be welcome to our events because they're a threat.
I've heard from, as some of the groups you've mentioned earlier, part of the progressive pro-Palestinian milieu in Hamilton, they're not allowed to come into Jewish events and they're not happy about it. IJV members, what have you.
If I have a Jewish member of the community who is planning to come to our event to make a mess, to disturb the event, or to bring something that is totally unrelated to the event and to disrupt our event, It's not coming.
Thank you so much for sharing this with our listeners. This really important story.
Thank you very much, Irene.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Hamilton got a grant of $100,000 a year for the next 3 years to launch its security program. They have to raise more on their own, but some big Jewish Canadian foundations have stepped in, like the Ronald Rodberg and the Tannenbaum family, with matching money. Montreal's Jewish Federation also is part of the American Security Network. They joined at the same time as Hamilton did, but they run their own show. I'm told we can expect announcements soon covering Winnipeg, Vancouver, and Toronto, and also Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, Windsor, London, Atlantic Canada, and Victoria. If you want to see what this U.S. high-tech security command center looks like, check out the link in our show notes. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Avi Feingold. I'm the co-host of Bonjour Chai on the CJN Podcast Network and a contributing editor for the CJN magazine. Bonjour Chai is Canada's weekly Jewish discussion and debate podcast. We discuss the issues that are important to Jewish Canadians. The stereotype of Canadians is that we either all agree with each other or we disagree and we don't want to talk about it and we don't fight and we don't argue. We do our thing quietly and off to the side. And it's not always true. I like to think that Canadian Jews have strong disagreements, but that are respectful about it. I think historically that has been the case. And hearing two people disagree in a loving, friendly, idea-based sort of way, hopefully is a model for other people to have these conversations themselves. And I think it's important for people to be able to hear these things. We can't do this without your support. Your donation goes a long way to helping us bring you the stories that you want to hear. Please visit thecjn.ca/donate. And if you're Canadian, you can even get a tax receipt.